In the marble halls of Kensington Palace, where centuries of tradition echo through gilded corridors, a single decision would shatter the carefully constructed facade of royal unity. Princess Isabella had always believed that family came before duty, until the morning she discovered that in the world of crowns and titles, love is often the first casualty of power. The autumn morning mist clung to the windows of Kensington Palace like ghostly fingers, as if nature itself sensed the storm brewing within the ancient walls. Princess Isabella Catherine Mountfield sat in the blue drawing room, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the official document that had arrived with the Morning Post. The royal seal gleamed like a drop of blood against the cream-colored paper, and the words seemed to blur before her eyes as she read them for the third time. Her cousin, Crown Prince Alexander, had made his decision. After months of speculation and whispered conversations in the corridors of power, he had chosen to remove her from her Commonwealth duties, effective immediately. The reasons cited were diplomatic in their vagueness, restructuring of royal responsibilities, and alignment with new governmental priorities. But Isabella knew the truth cut far deeper than any official statement could reveal. The morning light streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows across the Persian carpet, shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness settling over Isabella's heart. She had dedicated 15 years of her life to Commonwealth relations, traveling to remote islands in the Caribbean, hosting diplomatic receptions, and building bridges between nations that had sometimes forgotten their shared heritage. Her passion for the work had been genuine, born not from duty alone, but from a deep belief that the monarchy could be a force for good in an increasingly fractured world. But politics, as she was learning, had a way of consuming even the purest intentions. The sound of heels clicking against marble announced the arrival of her private secretary, Margaret Thornberry, a woman whose efficiency was matched only by her loyalty. Margaret's face was carefully composed, but Isabella had known her long enough to read the concern in her eyes. "Your Highness," Margaret said softly, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. "The press has already gotten wind of the announcement. The phones haven't stopped ringing." Isabella set down the document and walked to the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens where she had played as a child. Those had been simpler times, when being royal meant tea parties and pony rides, not navigating the treacherous waters of family loyalty and political necessity. "What are they saying?" Isabella asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "The usual speculation. Some are calling it a strategic restructuring, others are suggesting personal conflicts within the family." Margaret hesitated before continuing. "There are rumors about your relationship with Ambassador Reeves." The mention of James Reeves sent a sharp pain through Isabella's chest. Their relationship had been the worst-kept secret in diplomatic circles for months, despite their attempts at discretion. James, the brilliant and charismatic ambassador to the European Union, had captured her heart in a way that no amount of royal training could have prepared her for. But love, as she was discovering, was a luxury that princesses could rarely afford. "Has Alexander requested to see me?" Isabella asked, her voice carefully controlled. "His office called an hour ago. He's expecting you at Buckingham Palace at 2 o'clock. Isabella nodded, her mind already racing through the conversation that awaited her. Alexander had been more than a cousin to her. He had been her closest friend, her confidant, the one person in their family who truly understood the weight of their birthright. But ever since ascending to his role as heir apparent after their grandfather's passing, something had changed in him. The easy laughter they had once shared had been replaced by measured words and calculated glances. The morning passed in a blur of canceled appointments and rescheduled meetings. Isabella's staff worked with quiet efficiency, their faces reflecting the shock that rippled through the household. These were people who had believed in her mission, who had worked tirelessly to support her Commonwealth initiatives. Now they faced an uncertain future, their dedication seemingly dismissed with the stroke of a pen. As Isabella prepared for her meeting with Alexander, she found herself standing before the portrait gallery that lined the corridor outside her private apartments. Generations of royals gazed down at her from gilded frames, their faces frozen in poses of dignity and authority. Her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria Adelaide, seemed to watch her with particular intensity, as if offering silent counsel from across the centuries. "What would you have done?" Isabella whispered to the painted figure. "Would you have chosen duty over love, tradition over truth?" But the portrait offered no answers, only the quiet judgment of history. The drive to Buckingham Palace took her through the heart of London, past tourists who stopped to wave at the royal car, their faces bright with excitement at this glimpse of monarchy in motion. Isabella waved back automatically, her training taking over even as her heart ached. These were the people she served, the citizens who looked to the royal family for stability and continuity in an ever-changing world. Yet how could she serve them authentically when she was being forced to live a lie? Buckingham Palace loomed ahead, its familiar facade offering no comfort today. Isabella had spent countless hours within these walls, attending family dinners, state functions, and private celebrations. But as her car passed through the gates, she felt like a stranger approaching a fortress rather than a family member coming home. The equerry who met her at the entrance maintained the formal courtesy that protocol demanded, but Isabella caught the sympathetic glance he cast in her direction. Word traveled fast within the palace walls, and by now everyone would know about her situation. Alexander was waiting in the throne room, a choice of venue that Isabella found telling. This was not to be a family conversation but an official audience, complete with all the ceremonial distance that such settings imposed. He stood with his back to her as she entered, his attention seemingly focused on the massive paintings that dominated the walls. "Alexander," she said quietly, using his given name rather than his title in a small act of defiance. He turned to face her, and Isabella was struck by how much he had changed in recent months. The boyish features she remembered from their youth had hardened into the stern mask of authority. His eyes, once warm with shared mischief, now held the cool calculation of a future king. "Isabella," he replied, his voice formal, "thank you for coming." "Did I have a choice?" A flicker of the old Alexander passed across his features before disappearing behind the royal facade. "Please, sit down. We need to discuss your future role within the family." Isabella remained standing, her chin lifted in a gesture of defiance that their grandmother would have recognized. "My future role? I thought you had already decided that for me." "The Commonwealth portfolio requires someone who can maintain absolute focus on diplomatic relations," Alexander said, his words carefully measured. "Recent developments have made it clear that your personal attachments may compromise your effectiveness in this role." "Recent developments," Isabella repeated, anger beginning to heat her voice. "You mean my relationship with James?" Ambassador Reeves represents a significant complication. His position on Brexit negotiations puts him at odds with several Commonwealth nations. Your association with him creates conflicts of interest that the government can no longer ignore. Isabella felt the walls of the throne room pressing in around her. "So you're punishing me for falling in love?" "I'm protecting the institution we both serve," Alexander replied, but Isabella heard the slight tremor in his voice that suggested the decision hadn't been easy for him either. "The institution," Isabella said bitterly. "Always the institution. What about family, Alexander? What about loyalty?" "Family loyalty sometimes requires difficult sacrifices," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "You know this as well as I do." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of shared memories and mutual understanding that was now fracturing under the weight of duty and expectation. Isabella thought of all the times they had supported each other through the challenges of royal life, the private moments of doubt and fear they had shared away from the public eye. "And if I refuse to end my relationship with James?" Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. Alexander's expression hardened further. "Then you'll be choosing him over your family, over your country, over everything we've been raised to protect." The ultimatum hung in the air between them like a sword waiting to fall. Isabella realized that this conversation had never been about finding a solution or reaching a compromise. Alexander had already made his decision, and she was simply being informed of the consequences. "I need time to think," Isabella said finally. "Of course, but Isabella," Alexander's voice softened slightly, offering a glimpse of the cousin she had once known. "Consider carefully what you're willing to lose for this relationship. Some doors once closed can never be reopened." Isabella left the palace with those words echoing in her mind, their implication clear. She was being asked to choose between love and duty, between personal happiness and family loyalty. As her car wound through the London streets, she realized that her life had reached a crossroads from which there might be no return. The evening news would report the official announcement of her reassignment with all the diplomatic language that such stories required. But behind the carefully crafted statements lay a human drama that would reshape not only Isabella's future, but the very nature of what it meant to be royal in a modern world. That night, as Isabella sat alone in her private apartments, she held two photographs in her hands. One showed her and Alexander as children, dressed in matching sailor suits and grinning at the camera with the careless joy of youth. The other was a candid shot of her and James at a diplomatic reception, their connection evident in the way they looked at each other despite the formal setting. Two different worlds, two different futures, and Isabella caught between them like a bridge that was slowly being torn apart by forces too powerful to resist. Tomorrow would bring new pressures, new demands for her to choose sides in a battle she had never wanted to fight. But tonight, she simply held those photographs and mourned for the simplicity of a world where love and duty had once seemed capable of coexistence, before she learned that in the game of crowns, even princesses must sometimes sacrifice their hearts for the greater good of the realm. The morning after her confrontation with Alexander brought no relief to Princess Isabella's troubled mind. She awoke before dawn, her sleep having been fractured by dreams of childhood summers at Balmoral, where she and Alexander had once sworn eternal loyalty to each other beneath the Scottish stars. Those promises seemed like relics from another lifetime now, buried beneath the weight of crowns and constitutional responsibilities. Isabella's phone buzzed incessantly on her nightstand, each notification a reminder that her personal crisis had become public spectacle. Her press secretary had already sent 3 urgent messages about interview requests from major networks, all seeking her comment on the royal restructuring. The vultures were circling, ready to feast on whatever scraps of drama they could extract from the carefully guarded privacy of palace life. She ignored the phone and made her way to the window, where London was beginning to stir in the gray pre-dawn light. Somewhere across the city, James would be preparing for another day at the embassy, navigating the complex negotiations that had made him so valuable to the European Union and so dangerous to the Commonwealth's diplomatic balance. He didn't yet know about her meeting with Alexander, didn't understand that their relationship had become a pawn in a much larger game of political chess. The sound of her private entrance opening announced Margaret's arrival with the morning briefings, but today her usually unflappable secretary looked distinctly ruffled. "Your Highness, we have a situation," Margaret said, setting down a stack of newspapers with unusual heaviness. "The story has taken on a life of its own." Isabella glanced at the headlines spread across her coffee table and felt her stomach drop. "Royal romance rocks Commonwealth relations," screamed the Telegraph. "Princess Isabella's love affair threatens diplomatic crisis," declared The Guardian. But it was the tabloid headlines that cut deepest. "Selfish princess chooses love over country and Isabella's betrayal, how a royal romance threatens the crown." "How did they get so much detail?" Isabella asked, scanning articles that contained information she was certain had never been shared publicly. "Palace sources according to the bylines," Margaret replied grimly. "Someone very close to the inner circle has been talking." The implication hit Isabella like a physical blow. These weren't speculative pieces based on paparazzi photos or diplomatic gossip. These articles contained intimate details about her relationship with James, quotes that could only have come from private conversations, insights into family dynamics that suggested a source with unprecedented access to royal inner workings. "Alexander," Isabella whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper than any official reprimand could have. Her private phone rang, displaying James's number. Isabella stared at the device for a long moment, knowing that answering would change everything between them, that their careful bubble of privacy was about to burst under the harsh light of public scrutiny. "Isabella," James's voice carried across the connection with its familiar warmth, but she could hear the tension beneath. "I've been trying to reach you since 6 this morning. Have you seen the papers?" "I'm looking at them now," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need to talk. Can you meet me at the usual place?" Their usual place was a small private garden behind the Serpentine Gallery, a spot they had discovered during one of their early clandestine meetings. It seemed almost quaint now to remember how careful they had been then, how they had believed that discretion might be enough to protect what was growing between them. "James, I don't think—" "Please," he interrupted, and the urgency in his voice made her decision for her. An hour later, Isabella found herself walking through Hyde Park under the wan November sun. her security detail maintaining a discreet distance that would allow for private conversation while ensuring her safety. She had chosen to walk rather than take her car, hoping the familiar rhythm of movement might calm her racing thoughts. James was waiting by the small pond where they had shared their first kiss 6 months earlier. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his usually immaculate diplomatic appearance slightly disheveled. When he saw her approaching, his face brightened with relief before clouding again with concern. "You look terrible," he said softly, reaching for her hands. "Thank you, that's exactly what every woman wants to hear," Isabella replied, but her attempt at levity fell flat between them. "The papers are calling for my resignation," James said without preamble. "My position on Brexit has always been contentious, but now they're framing my relationship with you as a conflict of interest that threatens British sovereignty." Isabella felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She had known this day would come, had tried to prepare herself for the moment when their private happiness would collide with public duty. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality of watching the man she loved become collateral damage in a war she hadn't chosen to fight. "What will you do?" she asked. "That depends on you," James replied, his eyes searching her face. "If we're going to weather this storm together, I need to know that you're committed to fighting for us. But if this is where you choose family over—" "Don't," Isabella interrupted. "Don't make this about choosing sides. This isn't a simple choice between love and duty. It's about the future of everything I've worked for, everything I believe in." "And what about what we believe in together?" James asked. "What about the life we've been building, the plans we made?" Isabella thought of those plans, the quiet wedding they had discussed, the charitable foundation they had dreamed of starting together, the children they might have raised away from the suffocating protocol of royal life. All of it seemed as fragile as morning mist now, liable to disappear at the first harsh wind of reality. "The Prime Minister called me this morning," James continued. "He strongly suggested that I request a transfer to a posting far from London, Australia perhaps, or New Zealand, somewhere our relationship couldn't be seen as compromising British interests." "And you said—" "I told him I needed to speak with you first." James moved closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Isabella, we could start over somewhere else. I have contacts in the private sector, opportunities that would allow us to build a life together away from all this political maneuvering." The offer hung between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person, but Isabella found herself unable to grasp it. Her entire identity was bound up in her royal duties, her sense of purpose derived from service to causes larger than herself. The idea of abandoning it all for personal happiness felt simultaneously terrifying and tempting. "I need time to think," Isabella said, echoing the words she had spoken to Alexander the day before. James's face fell, and she realized he had been hopping for a different answer, for the passionate declaration of love that would sweep away all practical considerations. "How much time?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. However long it takes to figure out how to be true to both my heart and my heritage." As they parted ways in the park, Isabella felt as though she was watching their relationship fracture in real time. The easy intimacy they had once shared was being replaced by the careful negotiations of two people trying to protect themselves from further hurt. The afternoon brought a summons to meet with her aunt, Princess Margaret Adelaide, the Queen's sister and the family's unofficial keeper of scandals. Margaret Adelaide had weathered her own romantic controversies in the 1960s, when her love affair with a divorced photographer had nearly led to her renunciation of royal titles. The comparison wasn't lost on Isabella as she made her way to Margaret Adelaide's apartments in Kensington Palace. The elder princess received her in a sitting room filled with photographs from decades of royal service, each image a testament to duty chosen over personal desire. Margaret Adelaide's hair was perfectly coiffed despite her 78 years, her bearing still regal even as she poured tea from a service that had belonged to Queen Victoria. "Sit down, my dear," Margaret Adelaide said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived numerous family crises. "We need to discuss your current predicament." Isabella accepted the delicate china cup and waited, knowing better than to speak before her aunt had said her piece. "I've been watching the coverage of your situation with great interest," Margaret Adelaide continued. "The press is having a field day, of course. They always do when a royal romance threatens to upset the established order." Did you come here to lecture me about duty? Isabella asked, her patience worn thin by 24 hours of criticism and advice. On the contrary, Margaret Adelaide replied, surprising her. I came to tell you about the cost of choosing duty over love and to warn you about the regrets that can haunt a life lived entirely according to other people's expectations. Isabella set down her teacup, suddenly giving her aunt her full attention. You think I don't know about the photographers and journalists who still occasionally call, asking about Peter, Margaret Adelaide continued, referring to the photographer who had been the great love of her youth. You think I don't wonder what my life might have been if I had been brave enough to choose happiness over protocol? But you chose the crown, Isabella said. You chose your royal duties. I chose what I was told was my duty, Margaret Adelaide corrected. I chose to sacrifice my personal happiness for an institution that, frankly, would have survived quite well without my martyrdom. And I've spent 50 years wondering if that choice was made out of genuine duty or simple fear of disappointing the family. The admission hung between them like a bridge across generations, connecting Isabella's current crisis to the long history of royal women who had faced similar impossible choices. What are you saying? Isabella asked. I'm saying that the monarchy has evolved before and will evolve again. Your grandfather married a commoner and the realm survived. Your cousin divorced and the Commonwealth continued. Perhaps it's time for someone in this family to choose love and see if the institution is strong enough to adapt. Isabella stared at her aunt in amazement. This was not the conversation she had expected, not the stern lecture about duty and sacrifice she had prepared herself to endure. Alexander seems convinced that my relationship with James threatens everything we stand for, Isabella said. Alexander is young and frightened, Margaret Adelaide replied. He sees threats everywhere because he hasn't yet learned that true strength comes not from rigidity, but from the ability to bend without breaking. The crown has survived world wars, economic collapse, and social revolution. I suspect it can survive a princess following her heart. As Isabella left her aunt's apartments that evening, she carried with her a new perspective on her dilemma. The choice she faced wasn't simply between love and duty, but between fear and courage, between accepting the limitations others placed on her life and daring to define her own path forward. But even as her resolve began to strengthen, Isabella knew that the hardest battle still lay ahead. The press continued to circle like sharks scenting blood in the water. Alexander remained convinced that her relationship threatened the monarchy's stability, and James waited for an answer that might determine the course of both their lives. That night, Isabella stood again before the portrait gallery, but this time she wasn't seeking guidance from the painted faces of her ancestors. Instead, she found herself wondering what future generations would think of her choice, whether they would judge her as a princess who chose love over duty, or as a woman who had the courage to redefine what duty could mean in a changing world. The photographs she had held the night before still lay on her bedside table, but tonight they seemed less like symbols of an impossible choice and more like different chapters in the same story. A story that was still being written, still capable of surprising endings that might honor both love and legacy in ways no one had yet imagined. The third day of Isabella's crisis began with an unexpected ally arriving at her door. Lady Catherine Pemberton, her childhood friend, and now one of London's most respected investigative journalists, stood in the morning rain holding a manila envelope that would change everything Isabella thought she knew about her situation. "We need to talk," Catherine said without preamble as Margaret ushered her into Isabella's private study. "And you're not going to like what I have to tell you." Isabella had known Catherine since they were 8 years old, when the future journalist had been the only child brave enough to treat a princess like an ordinary friend. That fearless honesty had made Catherine both a trusted confidant and, occasionally, an uncomfortable mirror reflecting truths that Isabella preferred to avoid. "Please tell me you're not here as a reporter," Isabella said, gesturing for Catherine to sit in one of the leather chairs by the fireplace. "I'm here as your friend," Catherine replied, "but what I've discovered will likely become a story whether you cooperate or not. Someone has been orchestrating a campaign against you, Isabella. This isn't just about your relationship with James anymore." Catherine opened the manila envelope and spread its contents across the coffee table. Photographs, email printouts, phone records, and handwritten notes created a mosaic of conspiracy that made Isabella's blood run cold. I started digging when the newspaper coverage struck me as unusually coordinated, Catherine explained. The same talking points appearing across multiple publications, sources that seemed to have remarkably similar access to private information, quotes that felt manufactured rather than authentic. Isabella studied the documents, her journalistic training from her university years helping her parse the implications. You think someone is feeding stories to the press? I know someone is, Catherine said grimly. And it's not just any someone. These communications trace back to Sir Reginald Worthington. The name hit Isabella like a physical blow. Sir Reginald had been her grandfather's private secretary for 30 years, a man she had trusted implicitly, someone she had considered practically family. He had guided her through her first royal engagements, helped her navigate the complex protocols of Commonwealth diplomacy, and had been one of the few palace officials who seemed to genuinely care about her personal well-being. That's impossible, Isabella said. Reggie would never betray me like this. Look at the evidence, Catherine insisted, pointing to a series of emails dated over the past 3 months. He's been providing detailed briefings to select journalists about your relationship with James, your private conversations with Alexander, even your meeting schedules and travel plans. Isabella's hands trembled as she read through the communications. The level of detail was devastating. Intimate conversations she had shared with Sir Reginald about her feelings for James, her concerns about family pressure, her hopes for finding a way to balance love and duty. All of it had been carefully packaged and distributed to journalists as part of what appeared to be a systematic effort to destroy her reputation and force her out of royal life entirely. But why, Isabella whispered, what could he possibly gain from this? Catherine pulled out another set of documents, these bearing the letterhead of Worthington Strategic Consulting, a firm that Isabella had never heard of before. Sir Reginald has been building a private consulting business for the past 2 years, Catherine explained. His clients include several major corporations with significant interests in Commonwealth trade relations, as well as at least 2 foreign governments who would prefer to see Britain's influence in the Commonwealth diminished. The implications crashed over Isabella like a tidal wave. Her trusted advisor hadn't just been betraying her personal secrets. He had been actively working to undermine the very diplomatic relationships she had spent years building. The Commonwealth portfolio he was helping to strip away from her was apparently more valuable than she had realized, valuable enough that powerful interests were willing to pay handsomely to see it placed in different hands. Who else knows about this? Isabella asked. As of right now, just me, my editor, and the private investigator who helped trace these connections, Catherine replied. But Isabella, this story is too big to sit on indefinitely. The public has a right to know that their princess has been the victim of a coordinated attack. Isabella stood and walked to the window, her mind racing through the implications of Catherine's discovery. The revelation reframed everything that had happened over the past 3 days. Her confrontation with Alexander, the harsh newspaper coverage, even James's sudden vulnerability to political pressure. All of it had been orchestrated by someone she had trusted completely. I need to confront him, Isabella said. Absolutely not, Catherine replied immediately. If Sir Reginald realizes his activities have been discovered, he'll destroy evidence and disappear into his consulting business. You need to be strategic about this. Isabella's phone rang, displaying Alexander's private number. She looked at Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. Alexander, Isabella answered, putting the call on speaker so Catherine could hear. Isabella, we need to meet immediately. Alexander's voice was tight with stress. Something has happened that changes everything we discussed yesterday. What kind of something? I've just received information suggesting that the press coverage of your situation may not be as organic as we believed. There are indications that someone has been deliberately feeding negative stories to the media. Isabella met Catherine's eyes across the room. What kind of indications? I'd rather not discuss this over the phone. Can you come to the palace within the hour? Of course, Isabella replied, her mind already formulating a plan. Alexander, who brought you this information? Sir Reginald came to me this morning with concerns about security breaches in your household staff. He's worried that someone close to you has been compromised by outside interests. The audacity of Sir Reginald's deception took Isabella's breath away. Not content with orchestrating the attack against her, He was now positioning himself as the concerned advisor trying to protect her from threats that he himself had created. "I'll be there soon," Isabella said, ending the call. Catherine had been taking notes throughout the conversation, her journalistic instincts engaged despite the personal nature of the situation. "He's trying to control the narrative by being the first to raise concerns about media manipulation," Catherine observed. "It's actually quite brilliant. He gets to play the role of loyal advisor while directing suspicion away from himself." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Isabella replied, her anger finally overriding the shock of betrayal. The drive to Buckingham Palace gave Isabella time to plan her approach. She couldn't simply accuse Sir Reginald of betrayal without ironclad proof, and she needed to be careful not to alert him to Catherine's investigation before they had gathered all possible evidence. But she also couldn't allow him to continue manipulating Alexander and potentially other family members with his manufactured concerns about security breaches. Alexander was waiting in the same throne room where they had met 2 days earlier, but this time he was not alone. Sir Reginald stood beside him, his familiar figure radiating the same concerned dignity that had made him such a trusted advisor for decades. Seeing him now, knowing what she knew about his betrayal, Isabella had to fight to keep her expression neutral. "Your Royal Highness," Sir Reginald said with a respectful bow, using the formal address he had abandoned years ago in favor of the more familiar Isabella. Even this small change struck her as significant now, another sign of the careful distance he had been creating while pretending to remain loyal. "Reggie," Isabella replied, keeping her voice warm despite the ice in her chest. "Alexander tells me you have concerns about my household security." "I'm afraid so, ma'am," Sir Reginald replied, his performance flawless. "I've been analyzing the pattern of media coverage regarding your personal situation, and I've identified several instances where information could only have come from sources with intimate access to your private conversations and scheduling." Isabella felt a surge of rage at his smooth delivery, but she forced herself to maintain a facade of concern and gratitude. "That's deeply troubling," she said. "Do you have any theories about who might be responsible?" "I've prepared a preliminary assessment," Sir Reginald said, producing a leather folder from his briefcase. "I believe we should focus our investigation on your personal staff, particularly those who have been with your household for less than 5 years." The folder contained detailed profiles of Isabella's most trusted team members, each analysis highlighting potential vulnerabilities or motives for betrayal. Isabella recognized the technique immediately. Sir Reginald was creating a list of scapegoats, people who could be blamed for his own actions, while he continued to position himself as the solution to the crisis he had created. "This is very thorough," Isabella said, flipping through the pages. "How long did it take you to compile this analysis?" "I've been working on it since the first concerning articles appeared," Sir Reginald replied. "I felt it was my duty to protect your Royal Highness from these attacks, even if it meant suspecting people we've all grown to trust." The performance was masterful, Isabella had to admit. Sir Reginald had cast himself as the reluctant investigator, forced by duty to consider painful possibilities. His manufactured reluctance to suspect her staff only made his accusations seem more credible. Alexander was studying the profiles with obvious concern, clearly taking Sir Reginald's analysis seriously. Isabella realized that her cousin was as much a victim of manipulation as she was, his genuine desire to protect the monarchy being exploited by someone he trusted completely. "I think we should implement immediate security protocols," Alexander said. "Limit access to sensitive information, conduct background reviews of all household staff, perhaps even consider bringing in external security consultants." "An excellent suggestion, Your Royal Highness," Sir Reginald agreed. "I would be happy to recommend several firms that specialize in protecting high-profile individuals from media intrusion." Isabella bet he would, probably firms with which he had financial relationships or strategic partnerships. Every aspect of the crisis was being turned into an opportunity for Sir Reginald to expand his influence and his client base. "I'd like some time to review these profiles," Isabella said, closing the folder. "And I think we should be very careful about who we trust with this information going forward." "Of course," Sir Reginald replied, but Isabella caught a flicker of something, concern, suspicion, cross his features before his diplomatic mask reasserted itself. Actually, Reggie, Isabella continued, inspiration striking, I'd like you to focus your investigation on potential external threats rather than my household staff. I have complete faith in my people, but I'm concerned that outside interests might be trying to manipulate the situation for their own purposes. Sir Reginald's pause was almost imperceptible, but Isabella had been trained to read diplomatic tells, and she saw the moment when he realized his script had been disrupted. External threats, ma'am. Corporate interests, foreign governments, consulting firms that might profit from Commonwealth instability, Isabella said, watching his face carefully. I'd like you to investigate whether any outside parties have been attempting to influence media coverage of my situation. This time Sir Reginald's reaction was unmistakable, a slight tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible shift in his posture. He was realizing that Isabella might know more than she was letting on, that his careful manipulation might be unraveling. I'll certainly look into that possibility, he said finally, though I suspect we'll find that the primary threats come from within your immediate circle. We'll see, Isabella replied, her smile as diplomatic as his. I have a feeling this investigation might surprise us all. As the meeting concluded, and Sir Reginald departed with promises to expand his inquiry, Isabella remained behind with Alexander. Her cousin was still studying the staff profiles, his brow furrowed with concentration and concern. Alexander, Isabella said gently, what if the threat isn't coming from where we expect? What do you mean? What if the person manipulating this situation is someone we trust completely, someone who has access to everything we discuss and every decision we make? Alexander looked up from the folder, his expression thoughtful. You think Sir Reginald's investigation might uncover a threat closer to home than we realized? Isabella met his eyes, seeing in them the same trust and affection that had bound them together since childhood, before crowns and constitutions had complicated their relationship. I think, Isabella said carefully, that we need to be prepared for the possibility that the people we trust most might not be who we think they are. As she left Buckingham Palace that afternoon, Isabella carried with her the knowledge that she was no longer fighting just for her relationship with James or even for her Commonwealth portfolio. She was fighting for the integrity of the monarchy itself, against forces that would use deception and manipulation to serve their own interests at the expense of everything her family had worked to build. The war for her future had become a battle for the truth, and Isabella was no longer willing to be anyone's victim. The fourth day brought unexpected revelations that would reshape not only Isabella's understanding of her situation, but the very foundation of her relationship with the royal family. Catherine's investigation had continued through the night, and what she discovered would prove that Sir Reginald's betrayal was merely the tip of a much larger iceberg. Isabella found herself in the unusual position of conducting a secret meeting in her own palace apartments. Catherine had arrived before dawn, accompanied by a man Isabella didn't recognize, a thin, nervous individual who kept glancing toward the windows as if expecting surveillance. This is Marcus Chen, Catherine explained. He's been Sir Reginald's IT consultant for the past 18 months, and he has information that you need to hear. Marcus fidgeted with a laptop case, his discomfort obvious. I want to make it clear that I never intended for this to go as far as it has, he said. When Sir Reginald first asked me to help him monitor communications and compile information, he said it was for security purposes, to protect the royal family from potential threats. Isabella gestured for him to continue, though her patience was wearing thin with people who claimed good intentions while participating in her destruction. But over time, it became clear that the information was being used for very different purposes, Marcus continued, opening his laptop. Sir Reginald has been running what essentially amounts to an intelligence operation, not just on you, Your Highness, but on several members of the royal family. The laptop screen displayed a complex network diagram showing communication patterns, financial transactions, and relationship mappings that made Isabella's situation look like a small part of a much larger conspiracy. He's been collecting intimate details about Prince Alexander's private doubts about his readiness for kingship, Marcus explained, pointing to one section of the network. Information about Princess Charlotte's struggles with eating disorders, Prince Edward's gambling debts, even the Queen's private health concerns that haven't been disclosed to the public. Isabella stared at the web of surveillance and manipulation, realizing that every member of her family had been reduced to data points in Sir Reginald's scheme. What was he planning to do with all this information? Isabella asked. From what I could piece together, Sir Reginald was building leverage, Marcus replied. His consulting business wasn't just about providing strategic advice to corporate clients. He was essentially selling access to the royal family's weaknesses, helping his clients understand how to manipulate or pressure individual family members. Catherine pulled out another set of documents. We've identified at least 12 major corporations and 4 foreign governments that have received detailed psychological profiles and strategic recommendations for interacting with different royals. Your situation with James wasn't just about neutralizing your Commonwealth work. It was a demonstration of Sir Reginald's capabilities to potential clients. The cold calculation behind her personal anguish left Isabella feeling sick. Her relationship with James, her confrontation with Alexander, her aunt's surprising support, all of it had been reduced to variables in a business plan designed to profit from royal family dysfunction. There's more, Marcus said hesitantly. Sir Reginald has been coordinating with certain members of Parliament who would prefer to see the monarchy's influence reduced. Your Commonwealth portfolio was particularly valuable because it represented significant soft power that competed with their own foreign policy objectives. Isabella felt the walls of her world crumbling around her. The attack on her wasn't just personal or even institutional. It was part of a broader political campaign to weaken the monarchy's relevance in modern Britain. Who else knows about this? Isabella asked. As far as we can determine, Sir Reginald has been operating largely alone within the palace structure, Catherine replied. But he has connections throughout the government, the media, and the business community. This isn't just one man's betrayal. It's a network of interests that see the royal family as either a tool to be used or an obstacle to be removed. The magnitude of the conspiracy was overwhelming, but it also clarified something important for Isabella. Her choice between love and duty had been artificial from the beginning, manufactured by people who wanted her to believe that she couldn't have both, that choosing personal happiness would necessarily betray her public responsibilities. I need to speak with Alexander, Isabella said. He needs to understand what we're really facing. Be careful, Catherine warned. If Sir Reginald realizes his operation has been exposed, he could do significant damage before we're ready to act. He has enough compromising information about various family members to create a scandal that could seriously damage the monarchy's reputation. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text message from James. Need to see you urgently. Something has happened that changes everything. The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental, and Isabella felt a chill of suspicion. How many of their communications had been monitored? How much of their relationship had unfolded under Sir Reginald's watchful eye? I have to meet James, Isabella told Catherine. But I want you to continue gathering evidence. If we're going to stop this, we need to be absolutely certain of our facts. Catherine nodded, but her expression was troubled. Isabella, you realize that exposing this conspiracy will probably destroy Sir Reginald's life and career. He's been like family to you for years. He made his choice when he decided to betray our trust for profit, Isabella replied, surprised by the coldness in her own voice. Now I'm making mine. The meeting with James took place in his embassy office rather than their usual secluded locations, a change that immediately put Isabella on alert. The formal setting suggested official business rather than personal conversation, and James's demeanor confirmed her suspicions. I've been offered a position with the World Bank, James said without preamble. Based in Geneva, overseeing European development projects. It's a significant promotion, exactly the kind of opportunity I've been working toward for years. Isabella studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation she now suspected was everywhere around them. And you want to take it? I want to take it with you, James replied. Isabella, this could be our chance to start fresh, away from all the political pressures and family obligations that have made our relationship so complicated. The offer was everything they had dreamed about in their private moments together, a chance to build a life based on their own choices rather than the expectations of others. But Isabella found herself questioning whether even James's feelings were genuine or whether he too had been influenced by Sir Reginald's manipulation. Who told you about this position? Isabella asked. The offer came through diplomatic channels, James replied, looking confused by her question. Why does that matter? Because I'm starting to realize that very little in my life recently has been as straightforward as it appeared, Isabella said. She told him about Catherine's investigation, about Sir Reginald's betrayal, about the network of interests that had been manipulating her situation for months. As she spoke, she watched James's expression change from confusion to anger to a growing understanding of how thoroughly they had both been used. So even this job offer, James began, could be part of the same scheme, Isabella finished. A way to remove both of us from the British political scene while making it look like we chose to leave voluntarily. James sat heavily in his chair, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration that Isabella had come to know well. If that's true, then nothing we've experienced together has been real, James said. Our relationship, our plans, our dreams about the future, all of it has been shaped by forces we never even knew existed. Isabella felt a deep sadness for the innocence they had lost, for the simple love story that had been transformed into a political chess game. But beneath the sadness was a growing determination to reclaim control of their narrative. What's real is what we choose to be real, Isabella said. The question is whether we're going to let other people's manipulation define our future or whether we're going to make our own decisions based on what we actually want. And what do you want? James asked. Isabella looked around the embassy office, with its formal portraits and official documents, then thought about the palace apartments where she had grown up, the Commonwealth nations she had visited, the causes she had championed. All of it felt simultaneously like home and like a prison constructed by other people's expectations. I want to stop running, Isabella said finally. I want to face this conspiracy head-on and show everyone involved that the royal family won't be manipulated or controlled by outside interests. Even if it means giving up our chance at a normal life together. Especially then, Isabella replied. Because if we run now, we'll never know if our relationship can survive in the real world without the artificial pressures that have been placed on it. James nodded slowly, and Isabella saw in his eyes the same determination that was growing within her. What do you need me to do? He asked. Help me set a trap, Isabella said. If Sir Reginald and his network think they can manipulate the royal family for profit, it's time to show them the cost of that mistake. That evening, Isabella called Alexander and requested a private family dinner, suggesting that they needed to discuss her future without the presence of advisors or staff. It was a risk. If Sir Reginald had surveillance within the family's private communications, he would know that something had changed. But Isabella was counting on his arrogance, on his confidence that his manipulation had been successful, and that she remained unaware of his betrayal. As she prepared for the dinner, Isabella reflected on how much had changed in just 4 days. She had begun this crisis believing she faced a simple choice between love and duty. Now she understood that her real choice was between accepting manipulation and fighting for truth, between allowing others to define her role in the world and claiming the power to define it herself. The revelation of Sir Reginald's conspiracy had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. For the first time in months, Isabella knew exactly who her enemies were and what they wanted from her. Armed with that knowledge, she was ready to fight back. The war for her future was about to begin in earnest, and Isabella intended to win it on her own terms. The final confrontation came not in the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace or the formal conference rooms where royal business was typically conducted, but in the modest sitting room of Princess Margaret Adelaide's apartments, where 3 generations of royal women gathered to reclaim their family's dignity from those who would exploit it for profit. Isabella had spent the morning coordinating with Catherine and Marcus, ensuring that every piece of evidence was documented and verified, every financial transaction traced, every communication logged. The conspiracy Sir Reginald had orchestrated was more extensive than any of them had initially imagined, reaching into the highest levels of government, media, and international business. But with methodical precision, they had built an unshakable case against him. Alexander arrived at Margaret Adelaide's apartments looking haggard, the weight of recent revelations having clearly taken their toll. Behind him came Sir Reginald, still playing his role as the concerned advisor, though Isabella noticed a new tension in his bearing that suggested he sensed the trap closing around him. Before we begin, Isabella said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even her. "I want to share some information that has come to my attention about the true nature of the attacks on our family." Sir Reginald's expression remained neutral, but Isabella caught the slight tightening around his eyes that betrayed his growing concern. "As you know," Isabella continued, "we've been investigating the source of the media leaks that have compromised my privacy and threatened the stability of our Commonwealth relationships. What we've discovered is far more serious than simple gossip or security breaches." She placed the manila envelope Catherine had given her on the coffee table, its contents representing months of careful investigation and documentation. "We've uncovered evidence of a systematic operation designed to manipulate and exploit members of the royal family for commercial and political gain," Isabella said, meeting Sir Reginald's gaze directly. "An operation orchestrated by someone with intimate access to our private conversations, our personal struggles, and our family dynamics." Alexander leaned forward, his attention fully engaged. "What kind of evidence?" Isabella opened the envelope and spread its contents across the table. Financial records, communication logs, client lists, and strategic assessments that painted a damning picture of betrayal and manipulation. "Sir Reginald," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the pain of what she was about to reveal, "has been operating a consulting business that profits from selling access to our family's vulnerabilities. He has provided detailed psychological profiles and strategic recommendations to corporations and foreign governments, helping them understand how to pressure or manipulate individual family members." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander stared at the documents in disbelief, while Margaret Adelaide's face hardened with the anger of someone who had lived through too many betrayals to be surprised by another. Sir Reginald, to his credit, didn't attempt to deny the charges immediately. Instead, he sat back in his chair and regarded Isabella with something approaching admiration. "You've been busy," he said quietly. "Not as busy as you have," Isabella replied. 30 years of trusted service to this family, and you threw it all away for what? Money, influence, the thrill of playing puppet master with people who considered you family." "You wouldn't understand," Sir Reginald said, his diplomatic mask finally slipping to reveal the contempt beneath. "You've lived your entire life in a bubble of privilege and protection. You've never had to worry about your pension, your security, your relevance in a world that increasingly sees the monarchy as an expensive anachronism." Alexander's face flushed with anger. "So you decided to make us irrelevant faster by selling our secrets to the highest bidder." "I decided to adapt to reality," Sir Reginald replied. "The monarchy's power is diminishing every year. I simply chose to profit from that decline rather than pretend it wasn't happening." Isabella felt a surge of rage at his casual dismissal of everything her family represented, but she forced herself to remain calm. Getting emotional now would only give him satisfaction. "You were wrong about one thing," Isabella said. "You underestimated our ability to adapt, to fight back, to protect what we've built together." Sir Reginald laughed, a bitter sound that echoed strangely in the elegant room. "Have you protected it? Your relationship with Ambassador Reeves is still a political liability. Your Commonwealth portfolio is still compromised. Your cousin still doubts your commitment to duty over personal desire. What exactly have you accomplished besides uncovering secrets that will only create more scandal when they become public?" It was Margaret Adelaide who answered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades navigating royal crises. "She's accomplished something you never understood," the elder princess said. "She's reminded us what loyalty actually means, what family truly stands for. And she's shown us that the monarchy's greatest strength isn't our ability to hide our flaws, but our capacity to face them honestly and emerge stronger." Isabella felt a rush of gratitude toward her aunt, but she also knew that words alone wouldn't resolve this crisis. Actions were required, choices that would define not just her own future but the direction of the monarchy itself. "Here's what's going to happen," Isabella said, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "You're going to resign your position immediately, effective today. You're going to dissolve your consulting business and cease all contact with the clients you've been serving at our expense. And you're going to remain silent about everything you've learned during your years of service here, not because we're afraid of the truth, but because some confidences should be respected even when the person who held them proved unworthy of trust." "And if I refuse?" Sir Reginald asked. Catherine chose that moment to enter the room, carrying a briefcase that Isabella knew contained enough evidence to destroy Sir Reginald's reputation and potentially land him in prison for violations of the Official Secrets Act. Then my colleague here will be publishing a rather detailed story about your activities in tomorrow's Guardian, Isabella replied, complete with financial records, client communications, and testimony from several sources who are prepared to go on record about your betrayal of royal trust. Sir Reginald looked at Catherine, recognizing her as one of Britain's most respected investigative journalists, and Isabella saw the moment when he realized his situation was hopeless. Alternatively, Isabella continued, you can accept our terms, retire quietly to whatever country home you've purchased with your 30 pieces of silver, and live out your remaining years with at least some dignity intact. The negotiations that followed were brief and businesslike. Sir Reginald, faced with overwhelming evidence and the certainty of public disgrace, agreed to Isabella's terms. Within an hour, he had submitted his resignation and departed Kensington Palace for the last time, carrying with him only a small bag of personal belongings and the knowledge that his decades of service would be remembered only for their ignoble end. As the door closed behind him, Isabella felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and something approaching liberation. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the larger questions about her future remained. So what happens now? Alexander asked. The press will want to know why Sir Reginald resigned so suddenly. There will be speculation about scandal and cover-ups. Then we tell them the truth, Isabella said, surprising both her cousin and her aunt. Not the details of his betrayal that would only create more harm, but the truth about what we stand for as a family, about our commitment to serving the public interest even when it's difficult. She turned to face Alexander directly, meeting his eyes with the same openness they had shared as children. I want my Commonwealth portfolio back, Isabella said. Not because I'm entitled to it, but because I've proven that I won't be manipulated or controlled by outside interests. The work is too important to be left to people who see it only as a political tool. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Isabella could see him processing not just her request, but everything that had happened over the past few days. The James situation, he began, will be handled honestly, Isabella finished. I love him, and I'm not going to apologize for that or hide it, but I'm also not going to allow that love to be used as a weapon against the institution we both serve. If there are genuine conflicts of interest, we'll address them openly. If there aren't, then we'll stop pretending there are. Margaret Adelaide smiled, the expression transforming her austere features. Your grandmother would be proud, she said softly. She always believed that the monarchy's greatest strength was its ability to evolve while maintaining its core values. Over the following weeks, Isabella worked to rebuild not just her public reputation, but her relationship with the Commonwealth nations that had been her passion. The official explanation for Sir Reginald's departure cited personal reasons and a desire to pursue private sector opportunities, language that was technically accurate while avoiding unnecessary scandal. James declined the World Bank position, choosing instead to remain in London and work through the challenges their relationship posed rather than running from them. Together, they developed new protocols for handling potential conflicts of interest, creating transparency where there had once been suspicion. The press coverage gradually shifted from scandal-mongering to grudging respect for Isabella's handling of the crisis. Her refusal to be driven from public life by manipulation and her commitment to addressing legitimate concerns openly resonated with a public tired of political games and hidden agendas. 6 months later, Isabella stood in the same Commonwealth conference room where she had once worried about losing her portfolio, addressing delegates from 37 nations about new initiatives in climate change, cooperation, and economic development. Alexander sat in the gallery, his presence a visible symbol of family unity and institutional support. After the session, as delegates mingled over reception refreshments, James approached her with a small velvet box that made her heart skip despite her public composure. I know this isn't the most romantic setting, he said quietly, but I wanted to ask you somewhere that represents what we're both committed to: service, integrity, and the belief that love and duty don't have to be mutually exclusive. Isabella looked around at the delegates, at Alexander nodding encouragingly from across the room, at the portrait of her grandmother hanging on the wall, and realized that this was exactly the right place for such a question. "Yes," she said, before James had even fully opened the ring box, "but we're doing this differently than anyone expects." Their engagement announcement 3 weeks later emphasized their shared commitment to public service and their intention to maintain their respective professional responsibilities even as they built a life together. The wedding, when it came, would be a celebration not just of their love, but of their determination to prove that the monarchy could evolve without abandoning its principles. In her private moments, Isabella sometimes thought about the path not taken, the quiet life she and James might have had if they had accepted the exile that Sir Reginald's manipulation had been designed to force. But she had learned that running from challenges only gave them power over you, while facing them directly, even at great personal cost, offered the possibility of transformation. The crown she wore, whether literal or metaphorical, was heavy with the weight of history and expectation. But Isabella had discovered that its greatest weight came not from the demands it placed on her, but from her own determination to prove worthy of the trust it represented. And in earning that worthiness, she had found a happiness more durable than any that could have been achieved through compromise or escape. The monarchy would continue to face challenges, to evolve, to occasionally stumble under the weight of human frailty. But it would face those challenges with honesty, with courage, and with the understanding that true strength came not from hiding imperfections, but from the grace with which they were acknowledged and overcome. Isabella's story had begun with what seemed like an impossible choice between love and duty. It ended with the recognition that the choice had been false from the beginning, that love and duty, properly understood, could strengthen rather than threaten each other, and that the greatest service she could offer her family and her nation was the example of a life lived with integrity in the face of those who would corrupt it for their own gain. The princess had found her prince, kept her crown, and in the process, reminded everyone watching that fairy tales, while rare, were still possible for those brave enough to fight for them.